I'm Bernie and I'm an addict. First thing I want to do is thank the committee for letting me do this because I'm scared shitless. Yeah, and I've been around a while and this is something I've never done because of the fear. And, I walk through the fear when it's God's time and not my time. And I know I'm going to get through it. Whoa, talk louder? Okay. Okay. Anyway, I'm an addict. And a little bit of where I came from. I was born in the 40s. I was raised in the 50s. My parents were real poor. Back in the 50s, it wasn't cool to be on welfare, but we were on public assistance. There was a lot of, our family had a lot of dysfunction. There was drugs involved in it, but it was their way of maintaining, maintaining what they had to do in life. And that's something I didn't learn or accept until I got in recovery, and worked through a lot of that stuff. My sister was handicapped. My mother was handicapped. My father was codependent. I was the middle child, so I took the role of trying to make sure everything was okay and not cause any waves. My brother was the oldest, and he was the rebellious one. Basically what I learned really young was, something was wrong with me and I didn't know what it was. I never fit in, I just didn't have anywhere I fit in. I didn't fit in with the people or with the kids that I went to school with because we lived in a really high class area. And like I said, being on public assistance, or at that time, state aid, it gave that apartness, So I was made fun of a lot. Never had the clothes, My grandmother made all the clothes, and she made them to fit, my sister's style. She was 3 years younger, but she made them to fit her style because she was handicapped, and that was the focus of the family, Anyway, childhood was really, really hard. It was a lot of rejection, a lot of not acceptance, a lot of never fitting in, a lot of trying to figure out what was wrong with me, and I knew it was my fault. And even back then, I always thought that if we could just move, if my family could just move, everything would be okay. There was a lot of sexual abuse back then, and it's not like what the normal sexual abuse was. And I didn't discover this until I got well into recovery. With our family, it was a lot of verbal, emotional, and mental sexual abuse. Ever since I can't remember how small I was where I first learned that I was a cunt or a little bitch, or I was out to fuck somebody. And it was like, I didn't even know what that stuff meant, but I already figured out that I wasn't worth shit, So when I got, when I got in my teens and everything, it was like that's when I found boys. I never had girlfriends, I had girls that I knew, but I never had girlfriends. I knew the boys. I mean, in grade school, I was the one little girl, and back in the 50s, you didn't do this, but I did. I was the one little girl that was out playing tag or touch football with the boys, because that's where I felt the safest, because I didn't feel safe with the girls. They didn't want me around. And so to cover that pain, I just sort of try to fit in wherever I felt that it was safest to fit in at. So when I got into being a teenager, it was still the boys I was into, and it was still trying to figure out how to compete against the girls to get the boys. I got through the teen years, and I didn't even lose my virginity until I was a senior in high school, and the only reason I lost that, I didn't lose it until prom night. Because the guy that I was in love with 2 weeks before prom, dumped me for my best friend, and so I went out with this jerk, which I knew he was a jerk, but he was like a playboy jerk, and I figured, what the hell, you know? And I only lost it because I was going to get back at the guy, you know, my boyfriend. You know, it didn't get back at anybody but me. You know, so after high school, in the 60s, what you did which was really typical for women back then, was that you graduate from high school, and if you didn't go to college and find a rich husband, you got married. And if you weren't married by the time you were like 20, you were an old maid. You know, so I did the typical thing. I didn't have the money or the education or the intelligence at the time to go to college, so I got married. You know? So I graduated in 65. I got married in 66 to a guy I didn't even know, and I had my first child in 67. And you know, it's like I was also raised on fairy tales. You know, that you graduate from high school, you get married, you have children, and you live the rest of your life that way. I mean, that's the way it is, you know, happily ever after. And nobody told me that sometimes men leave, you know. And he left when Jim, the baby at the time, when he was 8 months old, you know, my husband left. And I haven't basically seen him since then. But, you know, when he left, that was the time that I turned 21. And when I turned 21, it was like graduating in 65, get married in 66, I had a baby in 67, and by 1968, I had no husband and found drugs. You know, I mean, that's the way my life had always worked, like one year right after the other. And when I found drugs, it was like, you know, it was the first time I felt like I was a part of something. You know, it was the first time that I didn't have to stuff feelings. It was the first time that I felt like I could be whoever I wanted to be, and not worry what people thought. You know, it was the middle of the, you know, getting started, or the middle of the hippie generation, and it was just peace, love, and rock and roll. You know, it was free love, which was great, because then I didn't have to worry about competing against girls for money. I didn't have to marry a guy. All I had to do was do what I wanted to do, and I didn't have to worry about anybody else. All I had to worry about was my kid and myself. You know, and it was the first time I felt like God, it was the first time I felt like it was okay to be who I was. You know, even thinking back then, when I think of the way I got turned on to drugs, and the way I got introduced to that lifestyle, you know, to the hippie era. You know, it was like even then I had a higher power that I didn't even know I had. You know, because the way I was introduced to this whole lifestyle, it was these people were real loving and caring people. You know. They sort of like walked me through drugs, introduced me by guiding me, you know, into drugs. There wasn't none of that. I went to a tavern and somebody popped a couple hits of acid in my beer, you know, and I got loaded and freaked out. You know, I had people that turned me on slowly and watched over me the first few nights and gradually increased my drug dosage, you know. But it was a time, you know. I'm really grateful for the time I went through. You know, I'm really grateful for being able to be a part of that lifestyle at that time, because that's part of who I am today. You know, sadly, that with me it only lasted a couple of years. You know, it got to the point to where it was really great and it was really fun and everybody was out for peace and love and all this for about 2 years, and then all of a sudden it seemed like stuff was changing. You know, people were changing, people that were, you know, I don't know, it all started changing. The drugs started changing, the people that, you know, I was hanging out with, we all sort of lost touch with each other, and I was starting to replace these people loving people with not so loving people, and the drugs stopped working. The drugs got to the point to where that was the first time I remember I realized that I might, be doing too much drugs, and maybe I needed to stop and I didn't know how. And so at this time it was like Jim was like 2 years old, and I had this kid to take care of, and it's like I wanted a different way to live, but I didn't know what it was and I didn't know how to get it. And what I ended up doing was getting hold of my brother. He was living down in California at the time, married. And I talked to him. Well, I went to the state first, and I checked out about foster homes and stuff. And they told me if I signed this paper, there was a 50-50 chance I'd get my kid back, when I got off the drugs and everything. And so I never signed the papers, because I was so scared of losing him. I wasn't, he was my life. He was my life. And so I talked to my brother, and I ended up agreeing to go down to California. They lived in Marysville, Yuba City. I don't know if anybody knows where that's at, but you might as well be sitting in hell as far as I'm concerned. And so I got, airplane fare. I sold enough drugs to get an airplane fare down there and took my son down there, and I was going to let them, keep him down there for about, I didn't know, anything about getting clean, so I figured 6 months. I had, if you can just watch it for 6 months until I got my life together. And that's what I did. I took them down there, and they agreed on it. But when I got down there, they said, well, if you leave, you're never going to see him again because we're going to keep him. You're not going to get him back. And so, in a panic, I took him and left their house, and I stayed in Yuba City. Marysville, Yuba City. I wasn't going to leave my kid there. I couldn't leave my kid there. And, it was pretty bad there. I hit a pretty bad bottom down there. I didn't just hit the bottom on drugs, but I hit the bottom on spirituality. I hit the bottom on emotions. I hit such a heavy bottom that the only way I saw out for Jim and I was to die. That was the only choice I had. And how I was going to do that was that, I was really good at going to the doctors and getting prescriptions when I needed them. And, and I couldn't find any other drugs down there because by that time it seemed like, even people that did drugs were really uncaring, and everybody was paranoid, and I just couldn't even connect up with people down there that did drugs, let alone, somebody to be friends with and help me out. And so the only thing I thought of was to die. And so I got the prescriptions, and I got a bunch of alcohol, and what I was going to do was I was going to get myself loaded to the point to where I can then turn around and give my son some stuff. So he can die first, then I was going to finish dying. And I got pretty low. I got my son to bed. I hadn't given him anything, but I got my son to bed, and I took some drugs myself, and I took some alcohol and everything. And I really got scared because I realized I didn't want to die, and I didn't want to kill my kid. So I called the suicide hotline that they had down there, and talked for a while, with the man on the telephone there, and told him what was going on and how scared I was, and there wasn't any way out, and this was the only out I thought of. And he was really good, and he talked to me. He talked, and then he asked if I needed someone to be there with me, to help me through the night, and I go, yeah, because I was scared. And he said, I'll be right over. And this was like by about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, I guess, something like that. And he came over to my house, and I was just so out of it. The next thing I realized was that he was on top of me. He was telling me his sad story. He was on top of me, and he said he felt sorry for me, and he left, And that's the kind of help I got. What I learned from that is you don't ask for help. You ask for help and you're going to get raped. You ask for help and they're going to take my kid away. and what that showed me was that I had to keep myself together long enough until my kid was old enough to take care of himself. That's what I got from that, and that's what I did for the next 20 years after that. I maintained my addiction. I didn't use too much. I didn't spend too much. I did the drugs because the pain was so terrible, so unbearable. I didn't know the way out. I couldn't even conceive of a day without drugs. Even when I wasn't doing drugs, I was doing drugs because I didn't realize what detox was. I didn't realize to get off of something it took so many days. So even the days that I wasn't using, I was still loaded. And I remember then I had asked God, I go, if you can just, if I can just live until I was like 30 years old, and then I can die, then I'll die. And, that's all I asked of God. And I didn't have a God back then either. The only God I knew was this kind of God that if I asked something this drastic, he would make sure that at the age 30 I was going to die. And that's what I did for the next 20 years was I maintained, It was my kid and I, it was Jim and I for about, until he was about 6 years old. When it came to about 6 years, when he got to be about 6 years old, I realized that maybe, I needed to change my life. It was getting really unmanageable to where I didn't feel comfortable as a mom raising my kid the way I did. God, there was men in and out of my life and in and out of my life, and it was like I was starting to lose touch with some of the men I was picking. Towards the end of that time, the last couple of men I'd been with were violent, and they never abused my son and I, but it was like close enough to where it scared the hell out of me, and I thought, boy, I better change my life because something's going to happen drastically. So I got married. I thought if I got married and moved to the country and had some more kids and got a cook stove and raised a garden and baked bread, it would fix everything. The same thing when I was a little kid. If I could just move, it'll fix everything. And I married this guy that I had known for a few years, and he was a good friend of mine, and we got married. And we moved to the country, and we had 2 kids, and I got my cook stove, and I baked bread, and I had a garden, and I hated cooking, and I hated the cook stove, and I burnt the bread. And the garden, I planted the seeds and the weeds took over. Either that or the neighbor's horse would get out of the corral and come over and eat my garden, so I gave that up. I hated being in the country because it was a small little town, and I'm a city girl. And I hated my husband. And I was getting to the point to where I was hating my kids, and I was hating myself, and I was hating my life. And what I'd done was I had traded myself off. I traded myself off to try and figure out how to be happy. I gave myself away again. It was a really rough 12 years I lived with this guy, that I was married to him. It was somewhere along the line. And it didn't start then. I know it started way back, but somewhere along the line, over this 12 years, I lost myself, It's like I know there's women out there that have been abused, and a lot of people go, well, how come you let the guy do this, If I fucking knew that, it wouldn't have happened. But I don't know how it happened. I didn't, it's like what we say around here. It's like I didn't wake up one day and go, gee, I think I'm going to be a drug addict. I think I'm going to really screw up my life. I'm going to try not to say that F-U-C-K, okay? I'm going to really not screw up my life, and I'm not going to, become a drug addict, and I'm going to give my life, and just have a really good life. I'm not going to wake up, I didn't, when I got married to this guy, I didn't go into it with the intentions that I'm going to be really happy in being, abused. This is a way to live. And I don't know how it happened. It happened so gradually that somewhere along the line, I just gave up me. I just gave me up. There wasn't, the only thing this guy didn't do is he never hit me. And you know what? That kept me in abuse for 12 years. Because I never felt, again, I never felt a part of, I never felt as if I had something to be complaining about, because this guy was a good provider. He had a steady job. We had a home. We had 2 cars. He didn't gamble. He didn't drink. He brought the paycheck home. All he did was smoke pot. And he never hit me, but there was a daily continuous basis of emotional, that same thing I grew up with, that emotional, that physical, that mental, that verbal abuse. It went from just the sexual into abuse, period, and the worst part of that 12 years was, when I lost myself, what we ended up doing was we traded. We didn't stay a husband and wife like when we first got married. We became a father and daughter. And I did everything like that guy said to do, I did everything. I couldn't go to the grocery store unless I counted for every minute I was gone. I had to I was only allowed to have a couple girlfriends that he approved of. The silent treatments, if I did something that I wasn't supposed to do, he'd give me the silent treatment. And this wasn't just not talking to me for 24 hours. This would be 2-3 weeks, with not talking to me. It would be have sex when he wants it, how he wants it, where he wants it. It was, I was so angry with him, and I didn't know what to do with these feelings, I didn't know, because I didn't think I had a right to be angry, and I didn't think I had a right to stand up for myself. I didn't think I had a right not to be, abused like this. I didn't even know I was being abused. This just became a way of life, and I didn't even think that was considered abuse, because I never got a fat lip or black eye out of it. And what I ended up doing was he was a night worker. He worked all night. And when you got 2 little kids, and Jim was, by then he was like up into 10, 11 years old. He wasn't really little, but I had these other 2 kids. I had Devin, which was another boy, and he was born in 1977, 1975. And then I had my daughter, Carrie, that was born in 1977. And Carrie was the typical little healthy little girl. She had a big mouth, she had a set of lungs, she had a temperament just like her mother used to have, and she had her own, she's a little go-getter, and, but she used to get me in trouble. She used to get me in trouble. Because Steve worked nights. He's not in the program, so I'm not breaking anybody's anonymity. But he worked nights, and so he'd sleep during the day, and you got a little rambunctious 2-year-old that has a set of lungs. And this girl, and I didn't have any parenting skills, And I didn't know what to do when she threw a fit, and she really knew how to throw a fit. Well, she'd wake him up, and he'd come storming out of the bedroom, chew my ass out, can't you're a rotten mother, can't you keep this kid quiet, da-da-da, and it's like, okay, and it was like, and I was so angry with her that she'd be getting me in trouble with him that I would abuse her. I'd hear her upstairs, or I'd send her upstairs. It was total insanity. She'd throw a fit. I'd send her upstairs. Steve's trying to sleep downstairs. I'd send her upstairs. She's screaming all the way upstairs. She gets upstairs, throws a humongous fit, slams on the walls and kicking the walls and stuff. And all I'm thinking is, God, I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to get in trouble, he's not going to talk to me, he's going to, So I would run up the stairs, grab this little girl, and slam her against the wall. Shut up, I hate you, and all this, because she was getting me in trouble, when people talk about child abuse, there's a fine line, a real thin line of going over that abuse and the killing, and I've seen that line, and that line had nothing to do with me wanting to hurt her to just inflict the pain. It was the insanity that I wanted to shut her up because she was getting me in trouble, I don't know where all this is coming from, but you know what? This is stuff I've had to deal with in recovery. This is stuff that when I got clean, I ended up leaving him. I ended up, I don't even remember what year it was, 85 or something, I don't know. But I ended up leaving him because I was either going to kill myself or I was going to kill him. See, it was right back to I was going to kill myself or I was going to kill somebody, And that's what it was. I was going to kill him or I was going to kill me. I was dying, like really, really quick dying. And I left. And, I didn't leave. I got enough nerve up. I'd gone to a little bit of counseling, marriage counseling, and I got enough self-esteem up to find out that, hey, I got rights here, I can, And so I asked him to leave. And it was in the middle of winter. He left and he was going to teach me a lesson. I had a wood cook stove. I had wood heat. In the middle of winter and I had no wood. And I had 3 kids and it was like 30 below zero and 4 feet of snow. So he ended up basically, I ended up leaving. He got the house, he got the cars, he got the kids, and I left. And I dove into like real heavy drug use that year. I mean, it was a daily basis, and I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew exactly how much I was using, and I didn't care. It was like, when I got out of that marriage, it was like opening up a gate and a big old Burma bowl is on the loose. That's how I was. I was just out that door, and there was absolutely no control in my life. I went totally gonzo, just totally gonzo on it. And some of the guys I ended up with, whoa, it was a lot different when I first started using when I was 21, and I picked who I wanted to go to bed with. Towards the end, it was like, I didn't even go to bed. I did on the bar room stool. I didn't even make it out of the bar to do it. And I realized then that I had to do something. I had to change because my life was really, getting insane. So I thought I'd move. So I moved back to Seattle. I moved back to Seattle. I connected up with some guy there that it was pretty insane. I thought, well, instead of these older people my age, I'd go for a 20-year-old. I'll never do that again. That was worse than the drugs. Big age difference. I was 30-some years old by then, But I thought, again, my life got to the point to where drugs was the full focus. I didn't have my kids. I didn't have a house. I didn't have a job. I was on welfare, and I wanted to get off welfare. My oldest son was living with me. He did go with me to Seattle to live, and he was going to the Navy, you know. He was taken off to go in the Navy. I went through another really bad, like dangerous, terribly dangerous relationship, and this guy, this time it ended up with a full-flung violent rape, and what I decided to do was that I had to change my life. You know, I had to change my life. So I got married again. See, this is the insanity of the disease. And this is what you call denial, you know. But you know what? God in my understanding, God, which is God in my understanding today. You know, I didn't have one for a long time. You know, God was watching out for me the whole time, you know, because this man I married, it's like I got out of the, I left the guy that raped me, and moved in with my sister, and got this job in a dating service, you know, video date, you know, these kind of video things, and I got to do it free because I worked there, and and I met this man, you know. And he was complete opposite of anything I'd ever dreamed of marrying. I mean, I had never been out with a guy with hair shorter than mine. And I had never gone out with a guy that didn't do, like, drugs. I mean, drugs, you know, not just experiment, but drugs. And I'd never gone out with a guy that wore a suit. And I never went out with a guy that had a job. Yeah, this guy had a career job. And we met, you know, we met through this dating service thing, and we're still together today. We're still together today. You know, and it was a year later after we got married, but like we went off for 3 months and got married, and we were married a year, and you know, it's like something needed to be changed because I wasn't happy, you know. My life was really unmanageable. It was really crazy. I tried to, you know, let go of the drugs, and I tried, you know, I was on different medication, and they took my thyroid out because they thought it was my thyroid, and then after I got clean, I realized I was detoxing. And, you know, please put my thyroid back. You know, I didn't realize, you know, there was something wrong. So what I thought, you know, I didn't move this time, and I didn't leave this time, and I didn't remarry, but what I thought was, I started delving into, I don't know where I first heard it, but like ACOA, like, it's your parents' fault, you know, it's your parents, you know, or it's the way I grew up. And somewhere along the line, some stuff was starting to come up, you know, and I have no idea, I don't remember where I connected up, but I started going to this, it was a women's ACOA meeting, that's Adult Children of Alcoholics, and I go in and I sit with these women and listen to their stories, and I started to connect up with some stuff. You know, and I thought, that's what's wrong with me. You know, it's my parents' fault. And so I really got into the ACOA thing. I really got into the adult child stuff and started reading all these books, you know, and self-help books, and taking my tranquilizers because you can't deal with this shit straight. God, there's a lot of shit there, you know, there's a lot of pain there. And you don't do that straight. But it started getting worse. You know, it's like even that stuff stopped working. It's like stuff was coming up. It was like recovery was working its way in, and I didn't even know what recovery was, and I didn't even know what was happening, but something was changing. And I was sitting at this speaker meeting one night at this adult child's group, and this lady shared, and it was like, I had never heard anybody share. And I mean, it was the first speaker meeting thing I'd ever heard. And this lady was spilling her guts. And a lot of what she was saying, I could really relate to, you know. And so after the meeting, I went up to her and I talked to her, and she was a therapist. And I asked her, I mean, I just popped up and asked, I go, well, what about if I came and did a little bit of therapy and worked through, maybe some of this stuff, I think I need help. And she goes, no, it's fine, she set up an appointment for me, and I got to the appointment, and she goes, well, the first thing we have to do, we really have to do this drug assessment thing, it's like, no problem. So, because I wanted to get down to the issues of my parents and childhood and all that. So she gave me this form, and she goes, well, just go through and check, the drug, that, you did. And it's like, check. I didn't have nothing to hide because that wasn't the problem. That wasn't the problem. In fact, I was pretty proud of being able to do all this shit because it kept me alive all these years. It kept me alive. And I just marked down this stuff, and she goes, whoa. And she goes, you used all this? And I go, yeah. And she goes, well, you know what? She goes, before you work on this family stuff, you might want to see about getting into a treatment facility and maybe getting off the drugs. And I go, why? And she goes, well, you really can't honestly get down and work on stuff if you're not in touch with your feelings. And what these drugs are doing is they're not giving you a chance to get in touch with the feelings. And I thought, at that time, see, I was only down to, I was down to taking this prescription that was really nice. It was Xanax, yeah. And I thought, and I told her, I go, well, how do you go to these meetings and not take something? Because then I'm going to get upset, But she said, just take our word for it. Just think about it, and talk to your husband, And I left her office thinking, you bitch. Yeah, how dare? I mean, I've got this stuff I got to work on, and she wants to take away the only thing that's saving my life, So I went home and I asked my husband. I told him, I go, well, this lady really suggests that I go into like a treatment place to get off of drugs, and, I think she's full of shit. What do you think? And he goes, when can she get you in? And I was angry. I mean, I was really angry, but you know what? I was angry, and I was just really pumped over this, but inside it's like, whoa, God, I'm going to get help, There's help there, No matter how badly I was fighting it, inside I wanted it more than anything else. And, I wasn't sure when to set up the time because she wanted me to go in right then, and that was like towards the end of January. And I told her I couldn't because Carrie's birthday was February 6th, And she goes, well, then how about towards, the middle of the month? And I go, well, I can't because Devin's birthday is February 20th, and or February 18th. And I go, how about in the summer? Because that way Jimmy's birthday will be over. His is in the end of May 29th. And then I can go in there. And therapists, they go, she goes, well, why don't we just get you in? Because there's not going to be any right time for you. Let's just do it. And they got me in within 3 days. No, they got me in the next day. And, and I went in, the only reason I went in was to show her and my husband that I didn't have a drug problem. I thought, okay, I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to do it because I always wanted to go someplace and be like committed for 30 days because then I didn't have to. I did. Because then I didn't have to deal with anything, I wanted a vacation, from life. And they put me in. And, I was in the detox section for 7 days. And they didn't force me out of that detox section, I mean, they had the room right down the hall where all these other patients were, that were inpatients, but they were like doing, learning stuff about program. And they had me on the phenobarbital because of the medication I was on, so I wouldn't die, coming down off this stuff. And I could have stayed in detox as long as I wanted, really. They said, well, when you're ready, let us know, and we'll put you out there. And I stayed in the ozone area for 7 days, and because it was safe and comfortable. I can go smoke as much as I wanted. I mean, they didn't have me tied down or anything because of the kind of, what I was coming off of. So me and one other lady had full run of the detox. I mean, we were up 24 hours a day smoking cigarettes, detoxing, and but there was something going on down there that I wanted, and I didn't know what it was, and so I finally went to her and I told her, I says, I want out of here and I want to go in there, and see what that's, something was pulling me there. And that's where my treatment started, all the counselors in this treatment center were all recovering addicts and alcoholics. Everybody that worked in this treatment facility, every one of them, including all the way up from the person that ran it all the way down to the nurses, were all in recovery. The only one that wasn't was the doctor, and the only reason he was there was because he had a best friend OD and die. And so this was his way of helping other addicts, And I spent that 28 days, whatever it was, in treatment. And that's when I first got introduced to Narcotics Anonymous. And because we had, they give you choices. They don't give you choices. Well, they do. They say, they tell you have to go to this meeting over here. And you got to go to this meeting. You got to go to this meeting. Then one day they go, there is this other meeting going on. And if you want, you can go to that one today if you'd like. It was like a Thursday afternoon, 1 o'clock. And yeah, I'll go check it out, because I wasn't connecting up, I just wasn't connecting up over there. And I walked in, and there were 2 women sitting there from my women's ACOA meeting. And I go, Bernie, we were wondering when you were going to get in a detox. And they were waiting for me. These women were waiting for me. And it was an HI meeting, and that was my introduction to Narcotics Anonymous. The first time I sat down, and the first time I heard them start reading stuff, it was like I was home. I was home. Oh man, I was involved with H&I for quite a while when I first got clean. In fact, by the time I was 9 months clean, I was area chairperson for H&I. They waived the year. They waived the year. It worked for me. It kept me clean. It worked for me. It kept me clean. I went to the 90 meetings in 90 days. Because that's what they suggested when I got out. First, when I got out, our relapse counselor, they call it, first thing Tony would do is he sits you down and he goes, he tells you about going out, you're being released, this is what's going to happen, and he says you're going to relapse within 60 days, and because the percentage of relapse in treatment centers is like 98% relapse. And I told him, fuck you. I did. I says, I ain't relapsing. I got to the point to where I was so tired of people telling me what I was going to do with my life, that when he told me that I went through this 28 days in treatment and 7 days in detox, and I was going to turn around and leave, and I was going to blow it all. And I was so angry at men at the time anyway, and this guy's telling me what my life was going to be like, that I was so angry with him, I love him, is that I stayed clean the first year just to show him, that I wasn't going to relapse. you know. And out of 78 people, there were only 2 women that didn't relapse, you know. And everybody else took his word and said, well, you know, if that's what I'm going to do, that's what I'm going to do. They went out and they relapsed. I was angry enough and took in reverse to where it made me so mad that I was going to show him, you know, that I was going to stay clean no matter what. You know, from then on, you know, it's like I started what Narcotics Anonymous has done, and it's showing me a way to live. You know, and that's all it's done. You know, it's showing me how to live. You know, the first step says I'm powerless over my addiction. It doesn't say I'm powerless over my drugs or my Xanax or my alcohol or my acid or my pot and all that. It says I'm powerless over my addiction and my life has become unmanageable. And that's exactly what I could relate to that. You know, I was totally insane. You know, I got there and I got here and I had no place else to go, you know. I don't know, I never went back out. I never did, because I didn't, number one, I didn't have any place else to go, and number two, you guys gave me hope, and that's something I'd been looking for all my life, you know. I had always been looking for a way to live and be happy. And you guys were living and you guys were being happy. And I didn't know how the heck you guys were doing it. But, you know, for one thing, you guys didn't come bombard me as soon as I could walk through the door and bombard me like walking into one of those hallelujah, you know, type things, you know. You didn't scare me away, thank God. You gave me choices. You know, you just told me 90 meetings in 90 days, and I don't care what kind of meetings you go to as long as you get your ass somewhere. They told me that keep going to meetings until I found out where I did fit in, because this is a lifelong thing. They told me to get a sponsor. My first sponsor was an AA sponsor, and I'll always be grateful to her because she helped me for the first, I think, 60 days that I was out. She helped me with that foundation, and she loved me, you know, until I found out where I wanted to work a program, which was in Narcotics Anonymous, and she lovingly let me go, you know, and then I got a sponsor, an NA sponsor, you know, and I'll always be grateful to Karen too. She was my first NA sponsor. I was sharing with Mary today about, you know, this lady. You know, 2 things I learned off this lady was, God, I spaced out already. But I know what I learned from her was that if I don't work on shit, I'm going to use over shit. You know, if I didn't work on whatever God brings in my life to work on, if I keep stuffing and if I keep running away and not work on stuff, I'm going to use over it. And if I use over it, I'm going to die over it. And I learned this from her because she told me this. You know, she told me this, but she didn't practice what she said, and she didn't have the strength to work through some stuff, and she went back out. You know, and she's still out there today. She's still out there. It's been 10 years. She's still out there. You know. You know, what Narcotics Anonymous has given me is they've given me a journey. You know, they've got. I'm on this journey. I'm on this path, and you know, that first year was pure shit. You know, that first year, all I could do was walk in a meeting, say, "Hi, I'm Bernie. I'm an addict," and I cry. You know, so they let me share first. You know, to get that out of it, because I cried through the rest of the meeting. But nobody ever told me I couldn't do that. You know, nobody told me it wasn't right to cry, or that's stupid, or you know, you've been doing this long enough. You know, you've been sitting on your pity pot here for a while. They let me do that until the tears started drying up. when I got here, there were so many feelings in here that I stepped for so many years, and when I took those drugs away, this stuff came up. And the first one that came up were the tears, because I never allowed myself to cry, I experienced the anger, and I experienced a lot of pain, and I experienced a lot of stuff, but I didn't feel a lot of pain, and I didn't feel a lot of anger, and I didn't feel that stuff. And there's a big difference between experiencing something and feeling something, So when I first got clean, that's all I could do was cry. It was like the dam opened up, and it felt good. Man, it felt good. And that went on for a few months. Then I got into H&I and got in all that, and I got in a lot of service, and I've been in service since I've gotten clean. I go to service, or I go to area level, then I come back down to sanity, Then I got to get insane again, and I get involved. Then I get out and get back onto my program again, That's always been a part of my recovery, and it always will be, I hope. But that first year, all I could do was hold on to my ass, because it was a hell of a roller coaster ride. It was one of the. I was a kid that would buy a whole string of roller coaster tickets, and I'd stay on the roller coaster and keep giving out the tickets and stay on that roller coaster, And when I got clean and went through that first year, it took me until last summer to get back on a roller coaster. It did. It did. I mean, I'd been on such a heavy roller coaster ride in recovery that it took me a while to get back on the real one, and it scared the shit out of me. This is a hard program. It's really, really hard to stay clean. If you think just coming in here, getting off drugs and coming in, you're going to be fixed, that ain't it. This is something that I had to want to do so bad that I was willing to hold on to my ass and go for the ride. The detox was terrible. The medication that I was on, it took me a little over 3 years to detox off of. And luckily, that's where I was grateful going through treatment, was because they taught me, the chemistry of my body, and they taught me about the one drug that I was taking, and they let me know what was going to happen. And when I feel this stuff, they explained to me how my body was reacting and why it was reacting. So I had that understanding, and I didn't freak and go out and use over it, my body stored this chemical for a long time, and it used to shoot out. Like, it would shoot out of my system, and I'd go, wham, I'd be off in left field again, But I knew that I was detoxing. And I'd talk about it, and I'd cry, and I'd get emotional, and I'd hold on to my ass and write it out, because I don't know, to me, a lot of what I went through early in getting clean was knowledge, learning about addiction and what it's about and what I'm going to be going through, and I learned that from people in the program. They told me, they were honest with me, let me know what was going on. And just hold on to my ass, because I was in for a hell of a ride, And that ride went on for a while, but then it started getting a little easier. It used to, when I first got, that roller coaster ride, it was like, it was like seeing earthquakes, one of those radio things, earthquake things, and seeing that little needle bouncing all over the place, and that's how I was, And then it started slowing down a little bit. And then it started getting little valleys, and then it started getting bigger valleys, and it's because it's taken a while, recovery, and that's something they told me too. I was willing, when I got clean, I was willing to listen. I had that open-mindedness, honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, and I was willing to learn about addiction and see how my body was going to react. I had to, because this is my body, and nobody's going to do it for me. I got to learn to see what my body's doing and understand it. And when they told me about the detoxing, they told me about how long it's going to take, and they used to say, God, it took you, 30 years to get here. It's going to get you 30 years to get your life together. So this is a lifelong program, you know. And I was willing to do that. The only thing I was scared of was that, you know, when I got clean, I was 40 years old. Well, that's way past 30. And that's when I had asked God, you know, keep me alive until I'm 30, you know. Well, here I was 40 and I got clean, and the first thing I thought of with the God of my understanding at that time was that, oh yeah, now I'm clean. Now I figured out, you know, how to live life, and he's going to take me, you know. I mean, that's the kind of God I had. Now he's going to collect, you know. And I went through, I went through about 8 years of dealing with panic attacks that were just, you know, that was one of the roughest parts of my recovery, one of the longest, was dealing with panic attacks. It was, I thought, I don't know how many times I thought I was dying. I mean, I really, really thought I was dying. What I used to do for panic attacks when I was using was run to the emergency room, get a shot of morphine, you know, and I'd be okay. Yeah? I remember this, it was towards the end of my panic attacks when I was starting to learn, understand what they are, which is fear and lack of God or lack of a higher power in my life, is that I was driving by myself from Seattle to California, and I had pulled off, I made it all the way to California, did what I was doing with my business there. I was heading back, and I stopped in Klamath Falls, Idaho, I think it was, and I had this big old dinner I treated myself to, went to bed, woke up about 2 in the morning, and I had the worst panic attack I'd had in a long time. I mean, I just woke straight up out of bed, sat up, and it's like, this is it. God's taking me, you know, red fox, you know, oh, this is it. That's what I thought. This is it. And I got myself in the car, and I drove myself to the emergency room, and I got on that bed, and he was examining me, and he says, you're not having a heart attack. And I go, I know, I'm having a panic attack. And he goes, well, we can give you something. And I go, no, I need a telephone. And he goes, why? And I go, because I'm a recovering addict and I got to call somebody, you know. And he did that. I sat in bed, he gave me the milk magnesia so I'd belch, you know, and I got the belching out, and he hooked me up the telephone, and I called the helpline, and they connected me up with this lady, and he closed the curtain on me, and I sat there for an hour and talked to another addict, you know. I told her I was having a panic attack. I told her why I was having a panic attack, because I was lonely, I was scared, I was on the road, I wasn't used to doing this, I was by myself, I'd eaten the wrong thing that night, which was horseradish, and you know, and I needed to talk, and she'd had panic attacks, and she knew, and she talked me through it, you know. You guys gave me hope. There's nothing I can't go through in life that Narcotics Anonymous can't help me go through, you know. Nothing. There's nothing. You know, and this is an addict that has used and abused not just street drugs, but medication all her life. I mean, if I wasn't on street drugs, I was on antidepressants, and I didn't take them like you were supposed to. And because I'd get to the point where I thought I was feeling good and quit taking them, then I'd go nuts again and go back down, and they'd put me, you know, it was like the game I played because I didn't know. And if it wasn't the antidepressants, it was tranquilizers, because I was a neurotic homemaker. That was a really good label they put on us. You know, I take my kids to the doctors because they're hyperactive and driving me crazy. My husband, I want to kill him. And the doctor goes, that's okay, you're just a little neurotic, take these. And then everything will be fine. You know, that was what they did. And, you know, there's nothing today that I can't work through. And it took me 8 strong years of working through my panic attacks and not taking anything for it. I mean, God, you tell a fucking addict, hey, I got a magic little pill, you know, and I will take it in a heartbeat, you know. God, it was so hard to keep saying no to that, and listening and talking about what I was going through and connecting up with people in the program that either were going through it or had gone through it and made it out the other side, and find out that all it is that I lacked a higher power, you know, and that's when my spiritual program began, because I was getting to such a bottom, hitting such a bottom with those panic attacks. I mean, that was, I don't know if anybody out there has had panic attacks, but it's the most horrifying thing I've ever experienced in recovery, physically, you know. And today I still get them. But today, I get, the last one I got was when I had to go to I didn't have to, I went to Massachusetts last year, first time ever going back there to sell at a convention. And it was just cool. It was really cool, and because I always wanted to go to the East Coast, and I thought I'd never get past Oregon, you know. I didn't even know where Nebraska was when we moved there. And I made all the way up to Massachusetts. I went to the convention, you know, I was feeling good, all this. I got on the freeway to head back, and I got lost, just a little lost. And so I was lost, and what I do when I get scared and stressed is I eat. So I grabbed a whole bunch, I grabbed 24 little donut holes. And before I even realized it, I had eaten every one of those donut holes. I was still lost. My stomach got upset. In the middle of bumfuck Egypt, I had a panic attack. Tremendous. So I thought, okay, so what you do is you get off the freeway, find a telephone, and call the hotline. They don't have those back there. You know, I got off the freeway, they didn't even know where the telephone was, let alone where a telephone book was. And when I found the telephone book, there wasn't any NA hotline. There wasn't even an AA hotline. I was looking for anything. I don't care what kind of hotline it was, I was going to go for it. And there was no hotline. So I got back in the car, drove some more, and that's when I started, you know, I started doing a lot of heavy praying, you know, because nothing's worse than being out in the middle of bumfuck Egypt. If you ain't got a higher power, you know, you're in a bad spot. You're in a bad spot. And I had one, you know. I had a really strong relationship by this year with my God of my understanding, which is God. And he got me to a town. And I got hold of the telephone book, and I called the helpline, and it was the wrong number. And so I called the treatment facility. It was the wrong number, you know. And it's like, it was like I made it through the panic attack, and it built my trust with God even more, because I found out that when I'm on the road like that, you know, I've got to have a God. You know, I really got to have a God, because NA's not always available. You know, they're not always there, and none of the other 12-step programs might not always be there. You know, so I've got to have something else, because me and my own company is really bad company. You know, I don't know, just a little bit more, something I wanted to share with you. You know, there's so much that I've gotten in recovery. Now, the main thing that, like I said before, the main thing that it's given me is a journey to myself. Today, I'm hyped about recovery. Today, I'm on this journey. I mean, I love the men in the program, you know, but I love the men in the program today because of the women, you know. I love my husband today, and I just started falling in love with him about 2 years ago. Honestly, before that, he was convenient. I mean, that's all I've ever had is convenience. And because I don't know how to love, you know. And I've had people a long time, they go, well, gee, you know, you can't, how can you love somebody else if you don't love yourself? And it's like, I didn't love myself. I hated going to meetings where they said, you know, we'll love you until you love yourself. And it's like, bullshit. You come near me and I'll deck you, you know. It scared me. It scared me, you know. How can you love me, you know. I thought it was all bullshit, you know. I thought it was all phony stuff, and you guys would say, you know, it's like we grow with love. Oh, that love word was one of the most terrifying things next to the G-O-D word that I had in my program over my whole life, you know. my husband and I have stayed together through all this. And the only reason we have stayed together is because, a couple of the women in the program have always told me, they go, well, you know what, it doesn't make any difference where you go or what relationship you get into. You can leave your husband any day and get in this one, but you're going to take the same shit with you, And it's like, because I'm the normal person. I look at the grass on the other side and I think it's a little greener. And it's like, there's been guys in the program that it's like, whoa, I can do better because this guy's got a program, he's in an AA, he's got clean time, he's got da-da-da-da-da, and my husband's like codependent, he doesn't go to meetings, he's probably an addict and doesn't know it, and it was really scary because I am growing and he wasn't, and we were going in different ways, and I was really scared there, the fact of the matter is that it had nothing to do with my husband. It had nothing to do with my ex-husband. It had nothing to do with my kids or my parents. It all has to do with me. I'm the one that I have to live with. I'm the one that, no matter where I go, there I is. Until I'm comfortable with myself, I'm not going to be comfortable with other people. Until I get to love myself, I'm not going to be able to love other people. And just the past 3 or 4 years, well, since I started getting a higher power, I'm starting to love myself. Okay? A little bit. And by loving myself, I am finding out that I'm sort of love my husband, And I tell him that. I go, you know what? I'm just starting to fall in love with you. And today, he's almost my best friend. I've got a woman that's even a bester friend. But he knows it and he understands and he accepts it, and that's okay. And I'm really grateful that God has put a man in my life that puts up with my bullshit. I used to be scared to death that he'd ever go to Al-Anon because he might call me on my shit. He would, and then he would get better and he would leave me. That's scary. That's really scary because I know how sick I am, and why would anybody want to stay with a sick woman, That's really scary. But he's hung out with me.
Love you.
Thanks. I love you too. I'm just really grateful that God's put a man like that in my life. And I've learned to love this man through the women. I'm learning to love the women because at one time I hated women. I fucked the men and hated the women. Period. That was it. I'm sorry, there was nothing else. That was it. I knew what to do with a guy. I never had to buy my drugs. I never had to work. All I had to do was, that's all I had to do. And the women, I didn't let the women near me. I didn't let women near me because I didn't like them. I didn't trust them. I didn't like them. They hurt me. And I wanted them in my life so bad, so freaking bad, that I kept them at a distance because all they do would hurt me, and I couldn't handle that, So it's a lot easier not to get close than to let someone get close to hurt you, It was putting that wall up. When I first got on the program, I tell you what, I was able, when I first saw that therapist, I was able to describe to her this brick wall I had around me, and I was able to tell her how many bricks were in it and how high up it was and all that. And I remember staying around here and keep coming back. I can still remember how that wall came down, a brick at a time. And there's not a wall up today, not a wall up today. And that was because I allowed women in my life, And it took a long time. Trust me, I let the women in my life when I first got clean. But it's only been over the past like 8 years, 7 years that I have allowed myself to connect up with the women, you know. And when I started to do that, that's when I started learning how to like men, you know, and how to love my husband, you know, and how to love my kids, you know, and how to start loving myself, you know, because you guys are my mirror, you know. I just got back this year from a Women's World Narcotics Anonymous convention. It's the second one. And God, that was the most powerful convention I had ever been at. You know, and I was really scared to go because there were no men. You know, what do you do somewhere with no men? You know, and they were all women, and I really didn't think I'd be able to have anything, you know, I mean, a whole weekend with, you know, that many, over 800 women. I was really scared because what if I just sat in my room? And I went with 3 women from Omaha. But that doesn't make any difference. I can still isolate real well, you know. And God, I came from that just so empowered and just so full of energy and so much hope now, you know, from my own journey. It's like, it's exciting. It's like I am on this journey to myself, and I am getting to be proud of being a woman today, you know, and being a mother, and I'm pumped on it, you know. I'm just really pumped on it, and this is all because it's taken time. You know, this isn't something I got my first year in or my third year in, and I've gone through a lot of different stuff in recovery and not used over it. You know, so this is just, you know, it's given me a journey to myself. And that's, oh man, I'm excited about that today. And I try and get the women excited about it, you know. I try and get them in, hey, embrace the journey. You know, you're in for a really neat trip. There's some rough times and some really rough going. But if you just hang in there and hold on to your ass and start reaching out to the other women in the program, you know, that can teach us how to reach out to the men in the program in a healthy way, you know. I don't know. Like you were saying, I don't think I said anything I wanted to say, but I don't remember a lot of what I said. And I guess I walked through this fear because I don't feel like too bad. And you know, just keep coming back, you know. It's not just keep coming back, it's just flat ass stay here, you know. You know, it's okay not to have to use again. You know, it's okay not to have to relapse. You don't have to. You know, and if you do go back out, maybe that's in God's plan, you know. I'm not God, you're not God. You know, God's got a plan for each and every one of us, you know. I've got my program, it works for me. You know, you got your program, if it works for you, great, go for it, you know. You try and do mine, and you'll probably die over it, you know. If I try and do yours, it'll probably kill me. My program's worked, you know, and it keeps me going. It keeps changing. You know, addicts say, well, we don't like change. God, when I look at all the things I changed in my life, bullshit. I changed men, I changed places, I changed everything all the time. I never stayed in one place. I never kept one job. I never stayed on one drug. I never had one guy. You know, it's like, I'm willing to change today. You know, if I change using, I can change staying clean. You know? So, I don't know. I'm just really glad you guys are all here, and I love this retreat because I really need this quietness, you know. And I just hope you guys, you know, just stay. Okay, I love all of you. Thanks.